Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Patreon podcast. This week, I wanted to talk about something related to game development. And I have been meaning to talk about this one for a little while, but I wanted to kind of talk about just kind of how games are made, at least when it comes to my experience with it. I can go over Color Jumper, and I'm going to go over Death Drives a Bus, since both of those recently had releases on the Switch and on Steam, respectively. But really, I just wanted to kind of talk about how game development works for me, because some people have asked questions about that, and it's a really interesting process that I don't, like most creative things, I don't think it necessarily has a standardized way of doing things. But I also think that there's definitely some common points that I can talk about. So first, I wanted to talk about Color Jumper. Color Jumper was my first real, in air quotes, real game. I had been programming and making games in the past, but I had never really made anything commercially viable, where I was mostly just doing like little proof of concept ideas, or I was messing around with something like a new programming language, and I just didn't really know what I was doing. But during that process, I came across the idea of like a platformer like Super Meat Boy, where you also had to match colors. And that kind of came from a game called Ink, which was more Super Meat Boy focused. In that game, the world is invisible until you like walk across the walls, or if your character dies, it kind of explodes in ink, and then that ink coats the walls, and then you have a better idea of how the level is structured based off of your prior experiences with it. And I loved the idea of implementing color and like making the game colorful and interesting in that way. And like mechanically, it wasn't inspired by that, but visually it was. So I like wrote down on my Trello board, and I think I still have that Trello board somewhere, where it's just like, you know, we have a character of 4 sides of different colors. Initially, the game was, if you mismatched the colors, your character would die. But as the game moved forward, and this is very common with game development for me, as the game moved forward, I figured out, or I discovered that it, like, killing the player wasn't as interesting as manipulating the level and making the level different, and like changing the landscape of the level based off of the way your character is oriented. So I went with that, and I really like how that mechanic turned out. And as my first game, I feel like it was a success, but as like a commercial product, I definitely feel like I could have done better on a lot of things. As far as the game itself, I intended for it to be made in about 6 months. Like usual, and this is pretty common with game development, you take your estimate and then you like double or triple it. In my case, it took me 2 years from the inception of the idea to the actual like completion and releasing it on Steam. But most of that time was spent figuring out mechanics and just making sure the game was as bug-free as possible. I try very, very hard to be thorough when it comes to removing bugs and like any inconsistencies in the game. And Color Jumper was rife with them simply because of how the mechanics worked in the game. There was a lot of unexpected interactions, and I was dealing with edge cases and trying to figure out all these weird interactions pretty much up until release. There's a level about halfway through the game called, I think it's called Compressed or Condensed or Complex or something, which just has a lot of mechanics going on all at the same time. And that was actually kind of my testing ground to see if all of these things, like if I was half on a moving platform and I phased through a wall that was a different color than the color that was facing upward on my character, like all these really, really, really crazy edge cases. Like I had to go through all of those and make sure that you didn't like start teleporting through walls and stuff. But the development of the game itself was fairly straightforward. It's pretty much just trying ideas, seeing how they worked, and if I liked that idea, then continuing to expand on it. And like I don't know how much detail I can go into with that. Like I was just kind of spending my free time tinkering around with the game, building levels that I felt were cool, and then just kind of just expanding it off there. And once I started to solidify where exactly I wanted it to go, that's when I started focusing on level design. And honestly, level design is my Achilles heel when it comes to puzzle games, because it takes so long. Another thing that I feel like I could have done better is actually create a level designer rather than building everything in Unity proper. I could have created a level designer, and that would have really sped along the process, because I feel that I was fighting the system quite a lot when it came to just, I want this particular idea executed in the game, but I had to build each level piece by piece by piece, and it just took so long. So probably investing a week into building a level editor would have not only made my life easier, but it also would have given people the opportunity to make their own levels and share those. And I think that that's definitely something that needs to happen in the future, probably with Color Jumper 2, whenever that happens. So it's like that kind of stuff really slowed me down. And the fact that I didn't have the tools available was really a limitation of just my knowledge on how to use this stuff, because again, Color Jumper was my first game, my first serious game in Unity. I had messed around with some simpler stuff in the past, and because of that, I just didn't have the knowledge. And I think that it's important to kind of come to terms with that when you're starting a project or when you're starting a new hobby, where it's just like, I know that this isn't going to be great, but I still have to do it because that's how you learn. And going through the code again for the Switch release, going through the code again is a little painful, considering how I set stuff up, how I managed a lot of the code base, and how I did all of that. And in the end, like on the front facing, the game looks wonderful. The game runs great. Like I can't complain about any of that, but in the background, oh man, it's a mess. Just because I didn't know how to use UI elements, so I was building stuff. I grew up using Macromedia Flash or Adobe Flash or whatever the heck it's called these days, and stuff is structured differently in Flash than it is in Unity. So like UI elements were just like on the game, and it wasn't like separated at all, which made resolution shifting a real problem and all this other stuff. And yeah, like it just took a lot of effort to make anything happen. But seeing as it was my first game, that's just how it goes. And yeah, I think really I had a demo available about a year, maybe a little over a year before release. And that year was spent making levels. I had 113, or I have 113 levels in Color Jumper, and some of them took, a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour to make, just because I didn't have the level editor. And beyond that, then they required testing, they required refinement, they required me to actually beat them, which some of the levels, that was actually really challenging. I think the final level, level 113, it's this real long level. It's like 75 seconds to beat, which is like twice as long as any of the other levels in the game. And I only beat it once to prove that I could, and to get like a reasonable time for it. And that was good enough for me. Like most levels I was able to beat pretty consistently, but that one in particular, like I just wanted to beat it to know that it could be beaten, and there wasn't like some weird soft lock or some big wall that pops up at the end that you can't overcome. So I had to beat them all. But that one I only beat once, and I was like, yep, that's good. Ship it. And yeah, like that year, basically leading up to the release was spent mainly with level design. And thanks to the beta and releasing the beta or the demo version was really helpful for two reasons. One, I was able to bring that to places like MagFest and get some people interested in that way. Two, it allowed me to share the game with actual people that weren't me. One of the best things I did for beta testing the game was give it to some speedrunners, because boy, they found a lot of bugs. Some of them I did fix, but some of them I leaned into. And I think that's another really interesting topic, where it's just like, just because it's not something that you intended to do, that doesn't mean that it's not worth investigating or leaning into. Specifically in this case, it was related to the being able to jump in the middle of a colored block, which wasn't really intended. And I kind of had phased out a lot of places where that could happen, but the speedrunners found really interesting movement tech, or basically just really interesting ways to move through the game, based off of jumping through a block in the middle. And once I discovered that and I started leaning into that, that opened a lot of possibilities for time tracking, because each level has a goal for beating it with under a certain number of seconds and under a certain number of rotations. But it also opened the possibility of creating secret goals that allowed players to find, essentially, once they quote unquote break the game in that particular level, and not all levels have a secret goal, but if you can break the game in that level, it gives you a platinum medal instead of a gold medal. And I think that it's really cool, and I really like it. And I don't know how many people actually found any, but it's one of those things that I love having those little secret things in there to reward players who are adventurous and are trying to break the game, and giving little nods to players where you thought you broke the game, you thought you beat me, but I had that in mind the whole time. There's one level in particular where you're essentially riding a beam of light across a pit, and there is a way to land like right on the edge of the moving platform that holds the beam of light, and you have to sit there for a couple seconds. And I programmed it in there very, very specifically, where if you're sitting on that platform for more than 2 seconds, I know that you cheesed that level. Cheesing is a term just basically meaning that you kind of broke the normal system of the game. And I give you an achievement for that. So you think that you beat me, and then you think that you're all smart, and then an achievement pops up being like, good job, you found it. So I think it's kind of a really fun little conversation that you can have with the player with achievements. I feel that achievements can be used very disingenuously, where it can like incentivize players to play. Oh, you play this game for 3,000 hours and you get this achievement. I think that that's like not exactly a good achievement to have, but being able to incentivize the player to play the game in a way that's not intended, or to have like a little kind of like sending them a little message, giving them a little wink and a nod, being like, yeah, I saw what you did. That's pretty cool. I think that stuff's pretty, that's how achievements should be. Yeah, leading up to launch then, it was just all level design. I had worked a little bit more on bug fixes and all that other stuff, and then it was Steam Greenlight, which that was back when Steam Greenlight was still a thing. They phased that out shortly after Color Jumper got approved. I'm very proud that Color Jumper got approved through the Steam Greenlight system. Not necessarily because of votes. I think that somebody at Steam saw my game and saw promise in it and kind of pushed it through, because I was definitely languishing in the votes department. But all of a sudden I got an email. It's like, yeah, you're approved. You're ready to go. And I was really blown away by that. I was really humbled. And then I released the game, and that was really stressful. And I was really focused on marketing the game myself because I had done everything else myself. Talking about the soundtrack would be a whole nother podcast. I should write that down. But yeah, like marketing the game was kind of the big folly for me. And I'm comfortable doing game development. I'm comfortable doing music. I'm comfortable doing graphic design, but marketing is something that I'm just unable to wrap my head around. I'm getting better at it, but it's just, it was just something that I dropped the ball on that. And I feel that the game languished because of it, where it's just, there was no real way to get traction on the game. So nobody played it. And since nobody played it, nobody bought it, nobody shared it. And I mean, I still got sales. I think I've made, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that I put so much time into it and I've only made a couple $100 off of it, but it's still something. Actually, it might be more around $1,500 because putting it in bundles, actually helped a lot. There was like 1 or 2 bundles that I put the game in, and, that worked pretty well. But yeah, like I regret not marketing it better, and I'm pushing it out on the Steam or pushing it out onto the Switch was kind of a childhood goal for me, just because I grew up with a Nintendo and I grew up making little games on the Nintendo or on my Commodore 64 back in the day, and just having that experience to like put something on a Nintendo and see like the Nintendo logo and then my logo like right after it that's definitely a bucket list thing for me. And hopefully I'll get more games on the Switch in the future. I applied for a dev kit and they rejected me, but I'm just going to apply again in a couple months once I have more things under my belt. And honestly, I was going to talk about Death Drives a Bus, but it was pretty much the same process. Like I started in February of 2020 and I finished in, I guess it was September of 2020. And it was a lot of the same process, just condensed down. And I think part of the reason why it was a shorter cycle is because it was a little bit of a smaller game. I had a little bit better understanding of how to create kind of a level editor. All of the levels in Death Drives a Bus are tiny 14 by 10 pixel images, and each color determines whether it's a road or a ghost or a power-up or all that other stuff. And I think that that helped iterate the design cycle and the level design cycle a lot. I also... yeah, really, the rest of it was pretty much the same. Like I had a demo available on itch.io. I made it available for free to patrons. And that helped with kind of testing and design and all that other stuff, just to refine it. Because when you're making something by yourself, you don't have anybody to bounce ideas off of. So you need somebody else just to throw ideas off, and just be like, hey, Ben, this is crazy. Why are you doing it this way? But yeah, like I'm looking at the time here. It's like 18 minutes. I don't want to have a 30-minute podcast because I have other things I need to record today. But I think that Death Drives a Bus was very similar. I did hire somebody after the release to help market it, and it went okay. This is nothing against the person I hired. She did a wonderful job, but I'm still not comfortable with that whole thing, and I think that level of comfort is somehow transferred into the communications that I'm sending out. And I got some really wonderful feedback from people. I know some people played it on YouTube. I think a few people played it on Twitch. And this is a different type of game too. This is like a dinky little puzzle game compared to Color Jumper, which is like an action like platformer. So there's definitely a different market for that. So I can't compare them. But overall, the response for Death Drives a Bus has been really good. I had a couple little scares with bugs on Linux that I had to fix, and that was a real treat. Having to install Linux on an old laptop so I can load it up and actually debug the issues was a learning experience, but it made me a better game developer because of it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I could probably talk about this for another episode. Like I'd love to go more into the detail for Death Drives a Bus, some of the creative decisions that I made because of that. And maybe I'll just make that the next episode because I know we're running up on 20 minutes here. But this was a really cool talk, and I'm really glad that I was able to sit down and do this. So yeah, thank you so much for being a Patreon subscriber, and thank you so much for listening. I genuinely do appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will actually just continue this topic next week. So I'll see you then. Be remarkable.